Good morning. Good morning. If I can call the meeting to order, please. The first order of business is public speakers. Doug, we're in your hands.
I'll do my best. We have about 25 speakers in total, so please 2 minutes per speaker. I will call several at a time. Please queue up by the podium and speak on agenda items only. Our first speaker is the Honorable Christine Quinn, Speaker, New York City Council, who will be followed by the Honorable Borough President Scott Stringer of Manhattan, followed by Councilman Charles Barron, and then Letitia Thompson, also Councilwoman from the New York City Council. Our first speaker, Christine Quinn. And if you would all assemble near the podium to facilitate the speaking. Are any of those individuals here? They're on their way. Okay. Council Speaker Quinn.
Thank you. I apologize. You can't hear the announcements out in the hallway, so you might want to, not to tell you your job, but assign somebody to holler out in the hallway. But thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify this morning. I think, as you're well aware, over 5.2 million New Yorkers rely on New York City's subway and buses every single day. The board's scheduled vote today on next year's budget amounts to less than a week after there's been a release of the cuts that are proposed today. Less than a week gives the riding public no real opportunity to comment on these cuts. It gave people no real time during the holiday season to take a morning off from work. It gave school children no time to organize themselves and get their opinion heard. And I am very sympathetic, as the head of a legislative body that has had to make tough cuts and will have to make tough cuts, about how difficult the situation you all are in. But what you cannot cut out is the public's opportunity to be heard. This cannot be today the last opportunity the public has to make their voice heard. By conducting business in this way, you send a message, perhaps unintentionally, but that the opinions of those you are charged to serve do not matter. Now, that's not the message you want to send. But worse than sending that message, you cut off any opportunity to have other ideas put on the table. Now, I know you all agree that the cuts you're talking about today, school Metro cards, Accessoride, are some of the last things you would ever want to do. So why not have a process where other ideas can come forward? The Council, working with the Strap Hangers campaign, and I in particular need to thank my colleague, Councilmember Jimmy Vaca, we've proposed some other alternatives for you to consider. You could reallocate 10% of direct stimulus aid to MTA operating expenses. That's $91.5 million. Although this is not something you want to do regularly, you could use budgeted pay-go capital funds for operating, $50 million. Now, you want to avoid, obviously, repeating the problem of the 70s and using capital for expense. But if you look at the enormity of the challenges of the MTA capital budget, that $50 million is sadly a rounding error. $40 million is the paratransit cut. That is something worth considering doing in limited situation. You could reallocate 10% of additional stimulus transit aid to state operating, $30 million. Now, is this the greatest idea in the world? I don't know, but it is worth considering. And it's worth having a process where other ideas can come forward. Because what isn't worth considering is taking Metro cards away from students. I'll just sum up by saying, we tell kids, you get into pre-K, you go to 8th grade, you study really hard, you can go to any high school you want. But now, maybe not so much you can get up to Bronx High School of Science if your parents don't have enough money to get you a Metro card yourself. This isn't what we want to do, even in these tough times. I know how hard your job is. Ours will be equally hard in June, but we stand at the ready to work with you to find other options, and I urge you not to make today the final word on the future of mass transit, particularly for students and disabled New Yorkers. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Thank you, Council Speaker. Next speaker is the Honorable Scott Stringer, Manhattan Borough President, followed by Charles Barron, Council Member, then Letitia James, and then Councilman James Vaca.
Good evening, and good morning. It seems like we've been doing this so many times in the last 48 hours. I have to tell you, after talking to constituents in the morning and in the evening, I think it's fair to say that New Yorkers are simply tired of this MTA budget dance that is quickly being known as the hustle. The reality is that you came to this city 5-6 months ago and asked for a bailout package. You asked New Yorkers to sacrifice. You asked New Yorkers to pay more taxes. You asked businesses to ante up. And then you told us, and I was here just a couple of days ago, then you told us that you miscalculated the kind of revenue you would take in, and here we are at this moment where your next dance is going to be taking it out on the next generation of our students. And I'm here to tell you that this tired old song is not giving us a sense of faith and hope in our transit system. So here's what I believe you have to do. You must not pass this budget proposal, which will only enhance the anxiety of our students and our seniors, people with disabilities. You must put many more ideas on the table so the state and the city can collaborate as we look at real solutions to dealing with the deficit that you, quite frankly, have failed to manage for quite some time. The onus is on all of you today to stand up and reject this logic that when a crisis comes, you go for the most vulnerable. You go for our students. You go for people with disabilities. It's not going to get you where you have to go. And finally, we should not be in the business of going after the next generation because this generation can't run a transit system. You have got to step up today, either make new proposals or take off the proposals that, by the way, the state has made it very clear. We're not doing away with Metro cards for students, and we're probably not going to attack people with disabilities. You know it. I know it. Every elected official knows it. So come up with a real proposal so we don't have to do the tired old budget dance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. Our next speaker is the Honorable Charles Barron, member of the City Council. Will be followed by Letitia James.
Let me just say to you this morning, how low can you go? You cannot get lower than this during a season's time where people are trying to struggle in this city. How low can you go to take the Metro cards away from our children? 550,000 children will be affected by this. $1,000 per child. And if a family has 3 children, that's $3,000. And you sit up, maybe we need to change the complexion and the gender of this board, because some of you don't understand that you shouldn't play games with our people. Some people say this might be dead on arrival in Albany. But you sit here and bring anxieties to young children. What do you want them to do? Jump the turnstile so you can now say they're criminals? Children are doing anything they can do to get to school. And you come at this time and want to take the Metro cards? How low can you go? This is a city that's already charging the homeless rent. You're raising the transit fare, raising CUNY's tuition, raising SUNY's tuition. We go through all of this, and you fat cats sit here, and some gals too, that go along with something that is going to devastate our community. And some of you may not even think it's going to pass Albany. But you sit here and play games with us anyway. This is a body that was charged with having cookbooks. We don't even know if you really have a deficit or when you have a surplus and what you do with the money when you do have a surplus. You need to stop playing games with the people. You respond slower to the people's needs than the C train and the G train on the weekend. You need to really reconsider this. Stop playing games with us. Do the right thing. Your budget is over $11-12 billion, whatever it is. It is time for you to stop playing games with the children. Stop messing with our families. Do the right thing. Turn this thing down and balance your budget off the backs of those who can afford it to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Letitia James, member of the New York City Council, will be followed by James Vaca,
Thank you.
and then Councilman Robert Jackson.
The success of the capital plan has allowed the MTA to expand for the first time in almost a decade, to improve maintenance and to bring the system to a state of good repair. All of that now is in jeopardy. The capital plan is fully funded by the feds, but only 2 years has been funded by the state. So that means that the East Side access, the 7th Avenue subway, and the 2nd Avenue subway will be holes in the ground. They will be tunnels to nowhere. And so at this point in time, it's really critically important that you push out these major capital plans. 2, that you reallocate capital to expense. And 3, in regards to a project in my district, as most of you know, that I have opposed for the last 6 years, you need to renegotiate Atlantic Yards and get the full market value for those yards. The fact is that Forest City Ratner has not paid you one dime, and you allocated those rail yards to Forest City Ratner for $100 million when we all know that those rail yards are worth at least $200+ million. As he plans to go forward in that project, you need to renegotiate that contract right now. In addition, the Clinton Avenue subway in my district, the Nostrand Avenue, and the Utica Avenue station, you cannot eliminate station agents at a time when we are experiencing some quality of life crimes at those stations. In addition, the G line cannot be reduced any further. You have not taken into account the growth along the G line, and I would urge that you reconsider that. And last but not least, eliminating the 25 bus in the heart of central Brooklyn will have a major adverse impact on the seniors who ride on that line. I would urge that you consider alternatives at this time, and that you provide transit access, and that you increase and maintain the system as opposed to going back to the 70s. Thank you very much. And last but not least, I would hope that you would appoint more women to this board. Women, for the most part, have been known to balance budgets on time, on target, and we have never, ever once been off the mark. And for all of the children in my district who rely upon subways, children who want to go to Stuyvesant, children who want to go to Tech, children who want to go to all of the specialized schools, children who want to be lawyers and doctors and engineers, children who come from single female-headed households, you cannot take away the Metro cards. This is their future. This is their opportunity to reach the highest of heights. You have caused a lot of anxiety and angst, particularly in my district, where so many people have dreams and hopes of reaching their goals for their children. Please do not destroy their dreams. Please, again, keep those Metro cards for our children so that they can become a success. And it's nice to see you, Jay. It's been a long time. Take care.
Thank you. Our next speaker is the Honorable James Vaca, who will be followed by Councilman Robert Jackson, and then Councilwoman Elizabeth Crowley.
Thank you. My name is James Vaca, and I'm a city councilman from the Bronx, New York, and I'm here because I know you have issues, and I know their problems. I developed a proposal, and Speaker Quinn and I have put forth, as she indicated, a plan which would negate the cuts at this point. We think there is a way out. There's got to be a way out, because not only accessoride and the school bus passes, those are very, very important, but the service cuts are devastating. We will be creating transportation deserts, including deserts in my own community, in Bronx Neck and Country Club. I'm going to have people who have to walk through Pelham Bay Park, literally, to get to a train or a bus because the service is being eliminated. I cannot ask that of my residents. It's not fair. I want you to know what an overarching question people have is. And the overarching question is, didn't they just raise the fares? Didn't they just raise the tolls? Didn't every fee in the world increase? Aren't we now paying 5 cents more for water bottle deposits? What happened to all this money that we're in this state of affairs? Somebody paid taxes that increased in the past year. We know that there are issues. We've put forth a proposal. But there is a frustration that people have that we are paying more and more and getting less and less. And they want to know how that's happening. They're not financial geniuses. They work every day. They're striving to make ends meet. But they need a way to get to work, and they need a way to get to school. They need a way to get to a senior center and to a doctor. I think these cuts are onerous, and I think they're unfair, and I think that they're singling out people who are in the most vulnerable positions. I conclude by saying we've developed a plan. We're not here just telling you no. We know you're in a tough situation. Consider what the council has submitted as a plan. I think there is a way out. But let me tell you one last thing. You can vote how you wish today, and I think that this vote is very, very quick and expeditious, beyond expectation. But the fight has not ended. It will not end with today's meeting, because if you vote for these cuts, the magnitude will be overwhelming, and the fight will continue during the next several months. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. By the way, this is the start of the process. It's not the conclusion of the process. Our next speaker, Councilman Robert Jackson, followed by Councilwoman Elizabeth Crowley, Adonis Rodriguez.
Good morning, board members. My name is Robert Jackson. I'm a member of the City Council that represents Northern Manhattan, including geographical areas of Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood, and part of Morningside Heights. I also chair the Education Committee on the City Council. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak to the board members on behalf of my constituents and other residents of New York City. And my points are very brief. I urge you to move to postpone today's vote until you, as board members, have been presented with a larger number of options to deal with the surprise revenue shortfalls that is triggering the cuts. I do not believe that the public benefits from decisions made in haste, and I do not believe that the agency has had sufficient time to fully develop an array of proposals. Please hold the vote. I believe that the MTA has a particular obligation, because of its history in budget and accounting irregularities, to weigh its options in a transparent, open manner. And that obligation extends to allowing advocacy groups to analyze these budget proposals and offer both alternative measures and critique the consequences of the proposals before the board. This is a serious revenue shortfall, and the MTA is proposing draconian measures. The public and advocates should be permitted a more reasonable time frame to respond. I ask you to please hold the vote. As chair of the Education Committee, I am extremely concerned about the elimination of student Metro cards. The entire New York City school system is built on the assumptions that students have access to public transportation, more especially at the high school level. The specialized science schools have been created to serve citywide populations. It is not uncommon, for example, a student from Staten Island to travel to the Bronx, to Bronx High School of Science, for example, and many small high schools have been developed with specific themes like arts, drama, aviation, technology, and so on. And they all attract students from all over the city of New York.
Please summarize your comments, Councilman.
If you don't mind, sure. I ask you to hold the vote. And finally, let me just say that, and I speak on behalf of one of my constituents who has a wheelchair, and she said to me at a board meeting last night, a community board, that they want me to pay double my fare that I normally pay just to take me 4 blocks up to try to get on a bus. And for those individuals that are disabled or have lost a leg in a war, how are they going to get around? I ask you, board members, someone put forward a proposal to postpone the vote today and consider all options.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Councilwoman Elizabeth Crowley, followed by Adonis Rodriguez, also a member of the City Council, Councilman Leroy Comrie, and then Kat Noel.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Crowley. I'm the council member representing the 30th Council District. I represent areas in Queens, including Maspeth, Middle Village, Glendale, Richmond Hill, and Woodhaven. Our parts of Queens, we feel that we're already underserved. These measures, the service cuts, are drastic today and would be devastating, to say the least. I urge you to hold off on this vote, to vote it down, to keep our services in place for now. I stand today in support of the ideas that were brought forth by our good speaker, Christine Quinn, and my colleague, Jimmy Vacca from the Bronx, who was found ways that you could look into negating these budget cuts and preventing these drastic services for our students, for our disabled, for our hardworking New Yorkers who often, in these tough economic times, have to pay so much more for less. I stand as a representative for the people of my community who cannot afford these service cuts. An example, the Q56 bus that goes down Jamaica Avenue is the only way that our handicapped can get around, in addition to Access-A-Ride. And they have to also, on Jamaica Avenue, you have the J train, and that is also proposed as a cut. We cannot afford this. Our community residents have a hard enough time walking up to get the train because of the poor condition of the elevated train, which I also bring to your attention, which is in dire need of capital services, and I understand it is in your capital plan. But most importantly today, I'm here to ask you to hold off and do not make these budget cuts. It's a time of the year, it's supposed to be the holiday season. Our community, our residents of the city, we cannot deal with this, and we need more time to really hear better plans and come together as one city to move forward, to work with the MTA to keep our city moving effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Next speaker, Councilman Idanis Rodriguez, followed by Councilman Leroy Comrie, and then Kat Noel.
Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chairman Walder, members of the board, my colleagues in government, and the public. I am Councilmember Idanis Rodriguez. I represent the communities of Washington Heights, Marble Hill, and Inwood. I'm here today to express my opposition on behalf of the people of my district. This proposal cut to bus and subway lines will devastate the lives of hardworking families in my communities and across the city, by making it even more difficult to them to make a living, many of whom barely make a living wage. City residents, particularly those employed in sectors such as restaurants and hotels, will be severely impacted by reduction in off-peak hours. Riders with disability will also be hit hard and will lose significant access to their ability to get around. I've been teaching for 14 years. I've been in the classroom. I know what it is to talk to my students. As a teacher, my salary was $75,000. As a city councilman, my salary is going to be $110,000. Those are 550,000 young people that will not get free transportation if you pass this resolution belong to family, many of them making less than $30,000 a year. It is unacceptable, it is unfair that we put taxes on young people. Those people belong to working class families that cannot afford another taxes. Therefore, we call for all the members to postpone this vote on this resolution, because I believe that the public deserves more time to discuss and to put the input. And at this moment of crisis, it is unfair to bring another taxes to working class families, especially those making less than $30,000 a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Leroy Comrie, followed by Kat Noel, Bernadette Boggs, and Jean Rushinoff.
Good morning. I'm Councilmember Leroy Comrie. I represent communities in St. Albans, Jamaica, Hollis, Cambridge Heights, and Queens Village in southeast Queens. I'm here today for multiple reasons, but I'm disappointed that this is the first time I'm able to talk to the MTA Board when we are not giving the public enough time for discourse, when you have not met with council members or other elected officials to discuss this problem. We have a serious problem throughout this state. We're trying to find revenues. We're trying to find an ability to make up shortfalls. To do this vote in such a manner that gives no public discourse, no opportunity for input, no opportunity for real discussion, really is a slap in the face. In southeast Queens, most children have to take 2 buses just to get to a high school within their neighborhood. Not even the children that have the fortunate ability to get to a school outside of their neighborhood, where they often have to take 2 buses and 2 trains to get to a school. I have 2 children in public school, and they've heard about this, and I can tell you that this has already destabilized and concerned a lot of children in my community and in my district. My 2 children in public school came to me and said, "Dad, you have to do something about this." Not because of them individually, but because they already know friends of theirs that are concerned about going to school, about keeping their education status. To try to pick on the less fortunate, to try to pick on Accessoride, to try to make headlines and not to make real change is disgraceful. We have opportunities for real discussion. We have changes that Speaker Quinn and Councilmember Vaca and Barron and the other council members have already spoke to about this morning. We cannot do these changes without input. We cannot do these changes without collaboration. You have real opportunities to find other methodologies. Do not do this vote today. Thank you.
Thank you. Kat Noel will be followed by Bernadette Boggs, Jean Rushinoff, and Dwayne Sampson. Kat Noel. For those who don't respond, they could speak when they arrive. Bernadette Boggs.
Good morning. My name is Anita Clinton, TW Local 100. I'm here to introduce Bernadette Boggs, the widow of Daniel Boggs, a track worker who got killed in the line of duty.
Good morning. My name is Bernadette Boggs. On April 24th, 2007, I lost my husband and best friend in a tragedy on the tracks. Since then, I have been raising our 3 children with the support of our family, our community, and Daniel's union, which has become our union. That union created a Widows and Orphans Fund. This means that I will never lack for health insurance. It means that while the children are growing up, they too will never lack for health insurance. It means if I need help, and I'm sure I will, to send them to college, I will get help. Recently, Mr. Chairman, you said it was suspicious that Mr. Zaccardi wanted to donate his fee to the fund and you held back payment on that fee. Perhaps you would like to explain why it is a good idea to hold back money that should be helping families like mine. Perhaps you would like to explain why you think heartlessness makes for good management. I'm all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boggs. Next speaker is Jean Rushinoff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and MTA Board members and staff. I'm Gene Rushinoff with the Strap Hangers campaign. In a couple of minutes, you'll be voting on whether to make $129 million in cuts to subway and bus service and phase out MetroCards. You know, for the riding public, this will mean more crowding, longer waits, and the death of 4 subway lines, including my own, the M train, which is why our folks over there are holding up signs that say, MTA, Governor, Mayor, to the riders, you are so screwed. I got some help from my daughter in preparing this. For the MTA, I think there's serious consequences. I think this badly undermines your credibility. The riding public was told last May that there would be no direct service cuts when the legislature bailed out the MTA. Riders held up their part of the bargain with a fare hike, where the fare went from $2 to $2.25, and a 30-day pass went from $81 to $89. But now they're threatened with the almost exact same list of service cuts again. As for the student Metro cards, I think this is a political hot potato for Governor Patterson and Mayor Bloomberg. I think the public will not hold this body responsible for the possible loss of student Metro cards. I think in the end, it'll be the governor and the mayor that they look to. It would be a huge burden on families and cut off a lot of access by young people to the city's institutions of learning, to arts, to culture, and to the life of the city. Now, it is true that this fiscal mess is not of the MTA's making, and I have a lot of sympathy, and you're taking some actions today that I think show
toughness in terms of cutting administration and payroll. But I do believe that the MTA has the resources to prevent the service cuts. We urge the agency, as others have, to use 10% of available federal stimulus money and some of the 2010 capital to operating funds. Now, I respect the MTA's concern and the chairman's concern about capital. I've fought for 30 years for the MTA to get the money it needs to rebuild and fix up the system. But for these devastating cuts at this difficult time, I think that this is the most realistic source for these crippling cuts from happening. If you have a better idea, I'm all ears. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Dwayne Sampson, and he'll be followed by Murray Bowden, Bill Henderson, Matthew Shotkin, Michelle Keller, and Larry Scarlino. Mr. Sampson.
Yes. Good morning, Honorable MTA Chairman and CEO Jay Walder, board members, agency presidents, staff, and community members and friends. My name is Dwayne Sampson, president of the COMTO, Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, New York State chapter. COMTO is a national organization of 39 chapters around the country with our national office in Washington, D.C. Our mission is simple, to ensure a level playing field and maximize participation in the transportation industry for minority individuals, businesses, and communities of color. And that's through advocacy, information sharing, training, education, and professional development. At the direction of my board, last night I was asked to come here today, and the primary item that we believe should be temporarily taken off the table is the reduction of travel discount currently provided for school children in New York City. We feel that such an action to eliminate student travel discounts will result in students and families making extremely difficult decisions regarding their educational options, which may result in increased fare evasion, leading to increased arrests and less educated and less productive citizens. Therefore, we recommend that the MTA table the elimination of the student travel discount until a comprehensive study is conducted, and I ask that you commission perhaps the Transportation Research Board through their channels to undertake such a study as to the impacts that such an action may take. The section item that of concern being considered today involves reduction of bus service on bus routes such as the B25 on Fulton Street in Brooklyn. I think that the elderly really impacted, even though that runs along a subway line. The elderly folks are very opposed to going down into the system because of their ailments and other fears that they might have. It's a reason that service is there, and we hope that you postpone and reconsider that action. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Murray Bowden, followed by Bill Henderson, Matthew Shotkin, Michelle Keller.
I'm here to apply for the position of president of Metro-North Railroad. I have one qualification that makes any difference. I ask good questions. I ask questions that should have been asked 20 years ago and haven't. In particular, why they blow the train whistle at train stations. We've spent thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars addressing that issue. But when you installed high-level platforms, there was no reason to blow the whistle anymore. The president of the railroad should have addressed that. We used to print these catalogs. I got it off the internet last night. You made a change. The president of Metro-North fought the people who gave an iPod program for the railroad schedules. You're printing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of schedules for no reason. I would take the job for 18 months for $1 a year and hire an executive to run the railroad. You don't have to know how to run a railroad. You have to know how to ask questions. Things that have been going on for years and years and years that should have been stopped and saved money so that you wouldn't be addressing these issues today need to be addressed today. I'm prepared to assume the position of president of the railroad for 18 months for $1 a year to bring a cultural change to the way we think around here. We have to think differently. This is the 21st century, not the 20th century. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. Is the woman in the red outfit someone who has signed up to speak? And I think I might have missed her before. Can you step up to the podium and identify yourself if I called your name earlier? And then we'll be followed by Bill Henderson. I'm sorry.
Good morning, and season's greetings to the panel and to the public. My name is Michelle Keller-Ing. I'm the second vice president of the Civil Service Technical Guild, District Council 37, Claude Fort president. I represent over 1,200 hard-working brothers and sisters serving the New York City's transit. These members, like all of our other members across the city in so many different agencies, were due to receive their collectively bargained second 4% wage increase as dictated by our contract in March of 2009. We're still waiting. We have been told repeatedly, publicly and privately, that which to our disappointment and our disagreement and chagrin, that our members wouldn't receive their money until the TWU MTA arbitration court dispute was resolved. In this, a season of giving, we are glad to have been informed that in recent days the court has ruled in favor of TWU to have MTA make their payment. Likewise, the Guild, patient and fiscally abused in this matter, want to know when can our members expect to receive their second 4% wage increase per our citywide collectively bargained contract. I thank you for giving me the time here today, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with our brother and sister students. Thanks so much this morning.
Thank you. Bill Henderson. And after Mr. Henderson, we'll have Matthew Shotkin and Larry Scarlino, Steve Millies, and Michael White.
Good morning. We're disappointed in the recommended budget that's before you today, and we don't feel that it should be implemented. We fully acknowledge that the conditions that led to this point are not of your making. The board and staff in good faith assumed that the promised new revenues that Albany enacted this spring would be received and that Albany would keep its prior funding commitments. Now, last month's cautious optimism has been swept away by a $229 million shortfall in new state taxes and $143 million in funding diversions. The riders don't question that you need to take action to deal with the shortfall. Instead, they question the choices that have been made. The most significant response to the budget in terms of financial impact is the reimposition of service cuts proposed and withdrawn this spring. These service cuts were unacceptable in March, and they're not unacceptable now. They will impose severe hardships on riders who are struggling to get to work, to get to school, and other obligations, even with the current service levels. A second significant means of closing the budget gap is phasing out the free and reduced student fare passes. This will create an exceptional burden on families, particularly those with more than one school-aged child. I can't believe that these families will feel that there's been no fare increase when they're paying thousands of dollars a year to provide school transportation. We're also exceptionally concerned about changes in paratransit. Accessoride fares may not be scheduled to increase in 2010, but under this budget, the level of service will certainly decrease as many riders will no longer be provided door-to-door transportation. We agree that the city needs to bear more of the cost of these services, but this is the wrong way to pursue this funding. Commuter railroads will see cuts as well. We're looking at about 13,000 LIRR riders being affected and over 3,000 Metro North riders being affected on the two commuter railroads. There'll be cancellations of trains, combinations of trains, no weekend service on some lines, half-hour service or hour service where there was half-hour. You propose eliminating subway lines and bus routes to generate $62 million, but you're still proposing to set aside $50 million as PAYGO capital funding. The budget also fails to take advantage of the potential to flex out some of the stimulus funding from the federal government, which could generate another $91.5 million in operating funds.
Please summarize your comments.
Yeah, we recognize that there's a need for capital funding, but in this present climate, all options need to be on the table. The only acceptable long-run solution is a package of funding sources that is stable, reliable, and able to grow to meet increased costs and increased demands for service. But in the interim, we can't sacrifice the system and its riders to serve those needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Matthew Shotkin.
Good morning. Boy, that's a nice striped tie, Andrew. And yours too, Jim. The fact that they're proposing an 11% cut in transit workers' salaries and 700 jobs will be cut is outrageous. 100 token booths having closed earlier this year is a real travesty. Transit workers need their jobs and the money also. The City Council, in a statement, said also that dozens of additional bus routes would be eliminated. Also, the proposed total operating revenues, as well as the fare box revenues, are too high because token booth clerks receive many fares from customers on a daily basis, and subways have to be constantly fixed. That number is too high. Fare hikes are 10%. The reason that I think that these numbers are too high are because most of them are over $3,000, which came out at this past Monday's Transit Finance Committee meeting. The PEGs should also be eliminated. There's too much of a gap right now at the MTA. Christine Diamond, who's running a little late this morning, in case you've forgotten, made a proposal to the PCAC about the raising of fare box revenues, and I want this proposal to be reenacted. Student fares shouldn't be eliminated. Students don't have as much money as adults who are working. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Larry Scarlino, then Steve Millies, Michael White, Lucy Cotton, George Spitz, and then Kenneth Kearns.
Good morning, honorable board members. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Larry Scarlino, and I represent, as a grievance and labor management representative, those 1,200 members that have been mentioned by my colleague Michelle Keller just moments ago. These members of the New York City Transit are the engineers and architects, scientists, and technicians who perform the design work and manage the construction of the infrastructure of this magnificent system. And what I'd like to offer to the board at this time is to have them know that these services are being duplicated by privately hired engineering firms and architectural firms. If these firms, if their contracts would be cut short, there would be loads of money available to make up the difference that we are talking about here in these budget cuts today. This is an important message, and we've been talking about this for many, many years now. It's something that really needs to have a much closer look taken at, and it's very obvious once it's done. I would appreciate it if the board would take a look at that and give it that consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Steve Millies.
My name is Steve Millies. I'm from the Bailout the People movement. And Ebenezer Scrooge would be ashamed to propose cutting propose getting rid of Metro cards for students like the MTA Board is doing. Ebenezer Scrooge would be ashamed to do that. He wouldn't dare to do that. Where is Mayor Bloomberg? He just spent $102 million to buy the election. If you're concerned about some financial shortfall, grab him, turn him upside down, shake out his money. You can pay for every single cut. And you ought to do that with everybody else on Wall Street. The MTA is nothing but a collection agency for the banks and insurance companies. What the MTA Board should consider is an immediate freeze on interest payments, those tax-free interest payments on their $20 billion worth of bonds. Poor people, working people, young people in the city shouldn't have to pay to Wall Street. People have to resist. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Michael White, and Lucy Cottin, George Spitz. Michael White.
Michael White, Noticing New York. I'm a lawyer, an urban planner, and a former public authority finance official. You guys don't get the big picture. So I figured you needed a little help. This is a $220 million net loss. That's not what the project cost, and it's being financed with diverted MTA resources. That's not what the project costs. That's the net loss to the public. There's an additional $400 million in bonds that was secretly authorized. It'll deepen that loss to about $620 million. This big picture is about dysfunctional New York. May 20th, the mayor says, I'm turning off the spigot, no more subsidies for Atlantic Yards. May 27th, revealed, Bloomberg, his representatives on your board, are colluding to give another huge package, almost $200 million in no-bid subsidies for Atlantic Yards from the MTA. Last week, what does Bloomberg say? I don't know why anyone is surprised at what is happening at the MTA. It's a piggy bank that keeps getting raided, as if he's not the one raiding it. Last week also, Patterson, $3 million in cash on hand. The state's running out of money. The legislature needs to cut back, dire cutbacks. How can the legislature take him seriously when Atlantic Yards is the premier example of executive branch controlled pork barrel spending? Last time I was here, you guys had the gall to have your public spokesman out in front of the press saying, the reason we're doing this is we couldn't get anyone else to bid. Well, if you go to the record of your board meeting, it was clear that you had never even considered anyone else to bid.
Please summarize your comments.
Okay. Willis Point, 29 expressions of interest from developers. Coney Island, 50 interested developers. The reason you didn't go out for bids is because this was a fixed deal. And you can end it today. It's as easy, it's very easy because there's a lawsuit. We've asked Cuomo, Attorney General Cuomo, and we asked the comptroller to investigate the no-bid handouts from this agency, which would fully close the budget gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last speakers are Lucy Cottin, George Spitz, Kenneth Kearns, James Branch, Brian Collinsworth, and if she's here, Kat Noel.
Good morning. I, too, want to follow up with what Michael White said, and I have two signs which I will read. Sweetheart deal for Ratner, lump of coal for writers. And the other one says, Dear MTA, Ratner has your $200 million. And I just want to say, why is it that our public authorities can never get it right? Why don't you open up your books, show it to the public, show your books to your public, and I bet the people, a lot of the people here, a lot of the people who spoke today will help you find some fat to trim. And I bet it won't be on the backs of the most vulnerable and underserved communities. This is a new low, even for the MTA, who makes promises about not raising fares, and then they take the Metro card away from the students, they take the services away from the elderly. That is a way of raising a fare. That is a tax on the people. And what's going to happen when our students can't get to school? And they're hanging around on the street corners because they don't have the money to pay for school unless it means them skipping lunch that day. They may be hanging around, and if they're hanging around, then they're going to get in trouble. Are we at that point going to give more money to the police, to the criminal justice institutions to take care of those youths when they ought to be in school? It's very failed priorities. Our students need to get to school. They need to be supported in that. It's hard enough for a lot of them to make that trip as it is, and we need to help them with that. The mayor has claimed there's going to be 1 million more people in the city in the next decade. How are those people going to get around? We've seen high-rise after high-rise go up. More people coming into our city, riding on the C train, the G train, as my councilwoman Tish James said, and I agree with everything she said. And how are they going to get around when you cut that? After pushing all this development, we're now going to say to the people who have moved into new areas that we're cutting off your transportation. It's time to postpone the vote.
Please summarize your comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Postpone the vote. Serve the people who you are supposed to serve.
Thank you. Next speaker, George Spitz, Kenneth Kearns, James French.
MTA board members, I'm going to condense my testimony because you have a crowd meeting, so the full testimony I want to pass around. The testimony is the solution. Substitute light rail for the 2nd Avenue subway. You won't need, this will take tremendous pressure off the operating budget. The $1.3 billion that the Bush administration and Congress has pledged to the 2nd Avenue subway is only part of a $4.65 billion that it costs. The rest money come from $450 million from the state bond issue, the remaining nearly $3 billion and growing from your operating budget. If you take the $1.3 billion that the Bush administration and Congress pledged for the 2nd Avenue subway and use substitute light rail would only cost $500 million for that $1.7 million. And you'd have enough money from the federal government funds to build Alan Capelli's North and West Shore of Staten Island light rail, and there'd be no money out of the operating budget. You'd have money for extensions in Mill Basin, Douglaston. Please take a look at, gentlemen, the feasibility of stopping that 2nd Avenue subway. Its costs are growing, and substituting light rail. The federal government money will pay for all of light rail, and you'll have lots of money left over, and you won't no longer need to bring pressure on the operating budget, which DiNapoli has said is going to, this is not going to be the last time the capital budget, you're going to have to take money from the operating budget for debt service, fare increases, service cuts to pay for the
Kindly conclude your comments,
2nd
Mr.
Avenue
Spitz.
subway and East Side access. Please take a look at this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Spitz. Kenneth Kearns, followed by James Branch. Kenneth Kearns. Kenneth Kearns. And James Branch and Brian Collingsworth.
Good morning. My name's Kenneth Kearns. I'm District Manager for Bronx Community Board 10. I have a short statement. Bronx Community Board 10 has learned among the many service reduction proposals is a recommendation to eliminate the BX14 bus. This particular bus line serves the Country Club section of the Northeast Bronx and is the sole link for the residents of this geographically isolated community to the IRT train at Buer Avenue. If this line were to be eliminated, many seniors and school-aged children would have to resort to using private automobiles in order to access important medical, educational, and shopping services. The addition of the cars to the existing roadways will add already unacceptable traffic noise and air pollution levels. The board further learned that the elimination of reduced fares for school children is also being considered. It is no secret that many families in New York City have suffered from the negative effects of the recession. The additional cost to these families of paying full fare for public transportation services for their children to reach school will be quite burdensome. The MTA and its constituent agencies should be looking internally to make these reductions. Any property that is leased should be vacated, and the affected operation should be relocated into agency-owned space. The MTA should look towards its many consultant contracts to determine if they are truly needed. If not, they should be terminated and the work performed by in-house agency staff. Finally, the riding public was told that the fare increase would meet the MTA and its constituent agency needs. Once again, we're told that there will be deep service reductions. Bronx Community Board 10 requests that the clock be stopped on the vote scheduled for Wednesday, December 16, 2009, and that the schedule of public hearings be established to consider alternatives to the draconian cuts. And thank you for your attention and consideration.
Thank you. James Branch. And then Brian Collingsworth, and then if she's here, Kat Noel will be the last speaker. James Branch.
Good morning. Good morning, board members, and congratulations to the new appointment, Mr. Chairman. It is obvious that the proposed budget is not going to be accepted as presented. It is also obvious that the State of New York financial house is in need of some major support from Washington, D.C. as a result of the problems related to Wall Street and the banking industry. Where I have been requesting a meeting with MTA regarding community accountability and safety issues, it is hoped that the letter dated to Mr. Sussman on December 2nd, 2009, in response to an email that I received from Washington on December 1st, will be respected and we can schedule a meeting. There are some severe problems that should be properly addressed, which has to include the financial support of Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Branch. Brian Collingsworth. Brian Collingsworth. Are you here? Is Kat Noel here? Not hearing a response, that seems to conclude today's public speaking session.
Doug, thank you, and thank you for all of the people who shared comments with us today. First order of business is to ask for a vote to approve, please, the minutes from the November board meeting.
Second.
In favor? Thank you. I'd like to take the budget discussion, if I can, as our first order of business. We have sat for the last hour and listened to public speakers, elected officials, and members of the public. I think they've told us that the MTA's transit system really matters to them. They've told us that it's not around the edges. They've told us that it is fundamental to how people in this region live their lives every single day. Now, I don't think they told us something we didn't know. We know that. That's why we sit around this board. And it's also the problem that we have. Because when $400 million is taken from our budget practically overnight, you have to make the kinds of changes that do have an enormous impact on people. I agree in many ways with the speakers. These actions will change lives. They affect people's well-being. Now, to be frank, I came back here to do the opposite. I came back here because I saw an opportunity working with all of you and working with the people in our organization to make a difference in a positive way in something that matters for the people of this region. I still hope that we can do that. But today is anything but that. today, instead of actually having a discussion about how we make improvements in the transit system, the discussion that we started when I walked in the door 2 months ago, we're talking about the pain that's associated with real reductions in service. And again, that pain is real. We will undoubtedly, and we should, spend the bulk of this meeting talking about that. We should debate it. We should have an open and frank discussion about it. We should also recognize, to clarify, that this is the start of a process, not the end of a process. You are not being asked today to take a final decision. You are being asked today to vote on a budget, on a plan, to authorize public hearings that will involve more debate. But it should be what we talk about. But there's another part of this that, frankly, I think as a board, we also have to talk about. And that's the issue that I certainly heard all around the region when I went around the region. It's the issue that I heard today, which is, can we really say that the money that is sent to the MTA, all of the taxpayers' money that comes to the MTA, is well spent? Are we in a position to be able to say that? Because if we're going to have credibility in an environment in which we're talking about truly painful things, in which we're doing things that hurt people's lives and well-being, then we need to be able to say that. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that we can. In the 2 months that I've been here, it's apparent to me that we don't operate in a way that ensures that every single taxpayer dollar that we receive is being used as effectively as possible. And so I think that in addition to the other discussion that we've been having so far, we also need to focus our attention on fundamentally changing the way that we do business. We need to rethink every aspect of our operation. We need to permanently reduce the cost of what we're doing. In short, we need to take the place apart. Now, I know that this is hard, but in this economic time, this is what businesses all across the state are doing. They can't afford to fail when they do it, and I don't think we can afford to fail when we do it. Now, I've spent some time over the couple of months that I've been here meeting with all of you, and I know from my discussions with many of you that the type of effort that I'm describing is an effort that you support. It's an effort that you have asked for. It's an effort that you've argued for. But there hasn't been the buy-in to really make it happen. One of the points I want to put on the table today is that that is not the case anymore. That buy-in starts from me as the chief executive organization, and not only am I committed, I can tell you that every one of our agency presidents is committed to undertaking this effort as well. We need to do it, and we should do it. And I firmly believe that there are many opportunities at the MTA. We have 70,000 dedicated men and women who help to run our transit system. But frankly, 5,000 people working in administration is too many. We have to be able to do it more efficiently. We spend $500 million a year in overtime. Now, overtime is part of our business. That's true. But we have to bring that number down. And when you look back over just a few years, the cost of materials and supplies for this business has increased by roughly 50% since 2003. And there's no excuse for that at a time when private businesses are finding innovation in materials and logistics that are allowing them to decrease their costs, not increase their costs. So I believe that we must go at these kind of efficiencies. We must be willing to look for change in productivity from this organization. And we must accept that as we do that, there will be layoffs. We must recognize this. We must plan for it. We must not be afraid to eliminate work that is no longer necessary. If you think about the budget that we're considering today, we're considering a budget that has a cut in non-representative pay of 10%, at the same time that our biggest union will be getting a 4% pay raise. That's an unacceptable imbalance. And our labor partners must be part of the solution that we have here. The reality is that the majority of our costs come from labor, and we need to find ways to be more productive. So I can't give you, having only been here a couple of months, a precise number today for how much money this will save the MTA. And I think we should stay away from treating this as another peg exercise. It's not that. We have to make fundamental changes. We have to show that we're doing something completely different, not just meeting an established target for the year, that we run at a target for the year. I think the savings will be significant. I think they'll grow over time. I wish there were a way to do it fast enough to be able to take the things off the table that we're talking about today. I don't think we can. I don't think you can get enough saving in the course of 1 year when we're starting literally at the beginning of the year to be able to take the things off the table that we're talking about today. But I don't think that should dissuade us from doing it. We have to do it because these savings are real, and it's the best chance to restore the credibility in the critical services. So one of the points I wanted to make here is that I appreciate your support. We are going to have to take difficult decisions about services, and we are going to have to sustain a difficult process in regard to cutting. Not just cutting for cutting's sake, but cutting so we can reinvest the savings back in the services that we're providing to our customers. As I said at the beginning, I expect that we will want to have an open and frank debate about what is here. Please do consider it the start of a process, not the end of a process. Please do understand that it is put together in extremely short order under very, very difficult circumstances. And I'm sure that many of us will want some more time to consider some of the things that are there. But we do need to adopt the budget today. We do need to move forward into 2010 with a balanced budget. Again, it's the start, not the end. So I will open for discussion. Andrew.
First, I'd like to congratulate you, Jay. I thought that was really a fantastic presentation and something that's long overdue, and I'm sure a lot of my fellow board members feel the same way. I've served as Westchester County Commissioner and now Vice Chairman and Chairman of the Finance Committee. I believe we now have a chairman in Jay Walder who is smart, knowledgeable, professional, and someone who is committed to do the right thing for the MTA. He certainly deserves the board's full support, and he has mine. So how do we get into this mess? Plenty of it was our own making. I'd like to highlight some of the things after being here 15 years that I've seen happen that I think have contributed to this. And believe me, there's many things, including the way we do business here. Union relations. For way too long, we have been forced to live with archaic work rules which have not allowed us to modernize the way we do business. We have seen our unionized labor costs escalate over the last 5 years, compounding to an increase of approximately 36%. What business could stay solvent with these runaway costs? To add insult to injury, we received an arbitration award of approximately 11% over 3 years in favor of the unions. On top of that, it reversed a portion of a hard-fought employee contribution to health care. This award is a travesty, considering the MTA was essentially bankrupt last spring, necessitating an over $2 billion bailout, backed primarily by a job-killing payroll tax levied on employers. This situation is outrageous, considering the state of the economy, the job losses suffered, the foreclosures of many homes, and the loss of people's savings. I hope this whole saga of the arbitration award is completely investigated by the Inspector General of the MTA. As you're aware, the Chairman has turned the whole matter over to the Inspector General for a complete investigation. Political leadership. Albany engineered a bailout which was tenuous at best. Then in the 11th hour, arbitrarily took away a substantial piece of what was given, and at the same time it has refused to pass legislation that would enable the MTA to reorganize and restructure itself in order to help
perpetuate a patronage system. The politicians in Albany have done nothing but provide a hand-to-mouth, on-and-off funding stream while at the same time doing nothing to rein in the union's outrageous demands. Albany has forced almost the entire burden of the capital plan on the MTA and its riders. The MTA shoulders approximately $2 billion of interest on its $27 billion debt load. The future funding of the new capital plan will increase this burden, and God forbid if interest rates rise substantially. It's great to promote the ideas in Albany of capital spending, but leaving the financing to the MTA and its riders. The mayor, while attacking the MTA at any chance he can, provided his unionized workforce with a huge 4% annual wage settlement, which became a pattern for our workforce, hurting our negotiating ability. MTA management. For the past 15 years, I have been saying that we have to change the way business is done here. The MTA needs to restructure itself immediately, centralize and consolidate management in many areas such as the railroads, buses, and support services, and particularly purchasing. We need to bring management of this organization into the 21st century. We need to revisit our capital plan, which has been unrealistically bloated with huge projects forced on us by politicians who want to accept political credit but not pay the bills and manage the projects. Our capital plan is totally unrealistic in light of the present economic conditions and will certainly seriously hurt the maintenance of our existing infrastructure. I might also add, it's the plan that we now have, in my opinion, is beyond the ability of this organization to manage it. The board needs to totally revisit all aspects of our operations to be sure that the public is getting their money's worth and that the operations are as efficient as possible. Many have suggested additional outside support. That would be great, but I don't believe we can count on any additional support. We need to do internally now what we have to do to be sure the MTA is solvent, efficient, and well managed. Thank you.
Jim?
The New York City student pass matter has been miscast in that of making New York City children or their parents pay for travel to school, a cost that they have had not to bear in the past. This pits the MTA Board against the New York City children and their education. It also gives politicians a place on which to stand and attack the MTA. The real issue is why the MTA covers any of the education-related expenses of New York City. Is this not the responsibility of the New York City education system? This would be consistent with the Long Island and Metro-North regions, where parents pay the cost of school transportation in their school tax payments. This also feeds the county's inequity issues with the MTA. Since we have more money going out and more money coming in from our counties than going out, we indirectly subsidize New York City students. Of course, this can be remedied. We can make comparable benefit payments to the upstate counties to make them the same benefits as the New York City children. I think that we have to look at this, and I think it's an appropriate measure to be seen in our budget reduction. Thank you.
Jeff?
The politics of the MTA budget every 2 months seems come home to roost, and frankly, it really has to stop. About a year ago, this organization was broke. This organization went to Albany and said, we have no choice. We, for years, have been living off of funding packages that don't make any sense, and we don't control any revenue coming in but the fares, and we all know how much that supports the system. We had a need of an operating deficit of over $1 billion and went to Albany and said, we also need to solve this going forward because this is the time to solve this thing so we don't keep coming back to you every month, every year, every 2 years, so we don't keep coming back to service cuts and fare hikes every single year. We laid out what everyone called was a doomsday scenario, which includes many of the service cuts we're talking about today. And we went to Albany and said, help us. Albany politicians said, you have to ask us. So we did, and we went up there. 5 months ago, Albany sent word down and said, we solved your problem. We gave you the money not only to cover your budget for the next 2 years, we reduced the amount of fares on the riders to 7.5% every 2 years. Not only that, we funded the first 2 years of your capital budget, so you don't have to come and talk to us anymore for the next 2 years, and you're on your way to solvency. They told us that. They then sent us the budget and say, we have a deal. You can make those restorations, and we expect you to make those restorations because we stepped in. Well, we did that. At the time, I know I was very skeptical we ever got the 2 years of the capital plan. Now, 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year, I recognize that Albany has budget trouble and they need to make cuts just like everyone else. But 2 weeks before the fiscal year, they cut $143 million out of the budget. 2 weeks before the fiscal year, they told the MTA didn't miscalculate the revenue. Remember, they were the ones that said, we solved your problem. This is how much money you're going to get from our bailout. They came up short $229 million. As the chairman said, that's $400 million with 2 weeks to go. And today and yesterday, and you read this in the paper, Albany says, well, we didn't actually do this. This is the MTA's fault. They're saying that repeatedly. And now they're saying they'll come back and we'll find a way to make school fares a priority. Well, I really want this board and everyone to be clear. Albany cut the school fares. There's no question about that. There's documentation to that. To now say, oh, it's the MTA's fault and we'll find a way to fix it once again, the bad MTA. They were the ones that put together a deal and said, you are fine for the next 2 years. It is their deal that fell apart. It was not the deal that was originally proposed, one by this board and the Ravitch Commission. It was something that they decided they wanted to do. And now it's the MTA's fault to fix it with 2 weeks left. That's impossible for anyone. You can't find $400 million of savings in 2 weeks. But that's what we're being asked to do. This budget is a terrible budget. There's no question about that. It includes service cuts no one really wants to do. It includes a whole bunch of changes to paratransit that frankly has confused everyone as to what exactly it is, because there are a lot of different pieces of it. And it includes this threat of reduced school fares disappearing for our school kids. This is a terrible budget and a terrible situation, and the politics has to stop. It's not, this is, you know, for the board, we go through this every 2 months. We're seeing this. But the public and the riders have to go through this, and they're caught in the middle of it. However, the chairman had said this, and we've been stressing over the last 2 days, this is nothing but a plan. This is a plan to keep the organization going, because the same people in Albany have said, we have a fiduciary duty to make sure the MTA keeps running. And they continue to change language to stand and say, hey, you have a fiduciary duty. Every one of us knows we have a fiduciary duty and have been doing that. This organization needs to have a budget in place or it cannot operate on January 1st. And no one's going to let that actually happen. This budget plan is a plan. None of the service cuts we're talking about today, none of the school fares that we're talking about today can take effect by a vote of this budget. There still needs to be hearings. There still needs to be the outreach. We still have to hear other things. We have to see how the taxes come in. Albany told us some of the money of the cuts is going to come back in the next quarter. Albany told us that. I don't know if that's true. It's possible some of the $229 million will come back in the first quarter. It's possible that it won't. There are so many things we have to talk about. We talk about pay-as-you-go capital, and we can't rob capital pay operating. I'm not so sure Albany ever gave us the capital money to begin with. But with that said, you can't leave holes in the ground, and we can't have no maintenance occurring on January 1st. So we have to hold out this pay-as-you-go in the meantime to make sure that we can continue using federal money to keep this place operating. You can't just turn your back on the system and say, we can't do this. However, we may actually do have a capital plan in 6-7 months, and we can revisit that. None of the actions that we're taking today in the budget, whether it be the school fares or the service cuts, can take effect without further action by this board. I think that's extremely important. On the paratransit stuff, there's a lot of misinformation out there. I've heard doubling the fare. I've heard we're going right after the service cuts. Well, I know that we need to make sure, and that we need to make sure that we continue looking at how we operate paratransit. I've been convinced by the chairman that we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be looking at the routing system. We're going to be looking at yellow taxis. We're going to be looking at everything we possibly can to reduce that before we go change the service side. And hopefully we will do better than that. The chairman outlined a whole number of bureaucratic changes. I'm sorry, of getting rid of bureaucratic changes. In fact, he just said that he wants to pull the place apart. That's something we've all been looking for. And the first time in a long time that the leadership of this agency has said is going to tear this place apart. How much money will that provide? I don't know. That's why this plan is set to balance and keep this place running, but it's there. I hope the chairman brings in more money. I know he hopes he brings in more money, but we have to be realistic and move forward and deal with this thing now. We'll stand shoulder to shoulder to make sure we tear this place apart to find additional savings within the bureaucracy. Finally, on the school fairs, there's been a lot of talk about the school fairs. There's been a lot of discussion about what the actual cost is, who it is, and whose responsibility. But I want to be clear. The city did not pull out its contribution for school fairs. That money is there. It is still there. We're not looking to pull it out. It was Albany that 2 weeks ago cut the school fair money that was provided specifically for school fairs, and that there is no way that I know I will ever vote for a tariff change that will force school kids, the only school kids in the entire state of New York, to actually pay to go to school. Over the next couple of months, I expect Albany to live up to the commitment that they do for every single school district in the state of New York, and that's provide their share of transportation for our school kids. I believe that will happen. I believe that they will actually look and realize what they did last week and say, oh yeah, we did cut school fares. And we should put that back. We have a lot to do over the next couple of months. This is nothing but a budget plan. It allows the organization to actually stay operating and move the many, many people they move every single day beginning January 1st. We need to act on our plan. I hope that a lot of these things don't come home to roost. There are many steps in this process to ensure that today's vote does not automatically allow the MTA to actually do this. This is the beginning of a process, the beginning of a discussion. I look forward to seeing what the chairman brings in tearing down the House and building it back up to be a much stronger organization so we can have that credibility, so the politics of dealing with the MTA budget can finally stop, and the riders and the public can see that this organization is moving in the right way and has the support of politicians in Albany, in the city, and throughout the region.
Thanks. When I was on my way to come to this meeting this morning on the downtown number 2 train and was pressed in shoulder to shoulder with my fellow passengers, I didn't think it was possible that you could actually shoo any more people into these cars. I assume that when and if, and I'm hopeful it's only an if, these service cuts were to come to pass, we might have to hire those kinds of pushers that they have in Tokyo to get people in the cars so that the train doors can close, because the trains are packed now. Obviously, if you heard the latest report from our transit president, subway ridership continues to climb, even in the face of this a devastating economy. So obviously, people are voting with their feet. They're continuing to rely on the system. For many of us, this system is our private automobiles that it would be for other people. A lot of New Yorkers do not own cars. We didn't have to actually be at this particular place today had the governor and the legislature done the right thing, which would have been tolls on the bridges. That would have been a much more predictable pattern of support. It would have equalized traffic. People are going miles out of their way now to get to free bridges, wasting energy, causing congestion at the free bridges. It's just crazy. And that the legislature couldn't tell us exactly when the payroll tax was going to kick in a meaningful way is an outrage. And then, of course, they blame us. But we have to look at alternatives, many of which you've heard. We can't always cut our way out of these crises. Particularly, and I said it last time this round of cuts came, we're not cutting fat. This is right into the bone. This is going to impact our public from Tuxedo to Turtle Bay to Travis. I mean, it's the entire district. It's going to affect everybody. Now, it was stated that these cuts were done to inflict as little pain as possible on our customers. Well, that sounds great if you're in a room in operations planning, but if you're out on the street, this is not a little pain. You've heard from speaker after speaker. This is cutting off entire neighborhoods. for a tiny little savings. As you've heard, Country Club section of the Bronx gets all of their service taken away. They're going to have to all get hiking boots to get to the nearest subway or bus. It's just crazy. It was said that some of these buses that are being cut because they duplicate subways. In the case of the M10 bus, and we heard this at the last round of public hearings, the M10 does not duplicate the subway above 125th Street. You're on your own above 125th Street. We had children in tears saying, this bus was our whole life. We use it to go to church. We use it to go to school. There are no alternatives once this bus is gone. And, you know, those are repeated for the bus that parallels the J line in Brooklyn and other routes in Queens. These are not luxuries. Now, the cuts to off-peak and weekend service are stated as you know, just a minute or two. Does anybody really think these trains run like clockwork and that you can count on that minute or two? The Transit Writers Council is just finishing a study of weekend service, and I can tell you, the fluctuations are so wide that a minute or two could equally balloon to 10 or 12. Again, a 50% cut in overnight service for our customers renders the subway system unusable when they go from 3 to 2 trains an hour. Just unusable, unless you're printing absolute public schedules for people at every station so you know when the train is coming. And, of course, if we get the electronic signs, that will be a help. Now, you know, everybody's saying we're not going to hike fares. It's an election year. If the legislature and the governor think that these deep service cuts are not going to impact them in an election year, they are sadly mistaken. They are misreading the public. So we've heard about a possibility of using some stimulus funds. Other systems have done that, or using the pay-as-you-go capital from the expense. You know, I think some of these things probably would make sense. I think we should look into them before we cut service. All in all, it's a hell of a welcome for our new chairman. I mean, you know, he's invited to New York and then told, you know, in not so many words, drop dead. I mean, if you're going to ask somebody to take this job and it's prestigious, it's an important job, you ought to give them the financial tools to do the job, not just pull the rug out from under them. So I certainly support your efforts to find any kind of fat and any kind of redundancy in the organization. I think we all support that. Now you have the case of folks, and we've heard from certainly the Northern County folks, and you certainly got an earful of that, Mr. Chairman, when you were up talking to Orange and Putnam and Dutchess. Those folks have actually now going to get a double whammy. They've paid the payroll tax, and they're going to get their service reduced. How do you think that's going to play in an election year? As I said the other day, these cuts are going to affect the New York way of life. It's as if you went into a small town and told 18% of the people, we're taking your automobiles away. That's what it means to us. I don't think it's going to help in getting companies to locate here. I don't think it's going to help in pulling New York out of this recession. The transit system is our jewel. Other people, you know, would die to have a transit system like this, and we're talking about cutting it. As far as jobs, when we heard at the last public hearing about the Staten Island cuts, I believe some nurses from Seaview Nursing Home said, you're cutting our Saturday bus. We have no way to get to the nursing home. They're going to have to look for other jobs. And, of course, that's going to be replicated all over the place. So, you know, I certainly support moving forward if it means looking at alternatives to these terrible cuts, looking at alternatives to where we can cut fat in the organization. I know Commissioner Saul has made that a hallmark of his tenancy here, and we support removing redundancy, but we certainly cannot support these kinds of cuts to our customers. And regrettably, when it comes to those cuts, if I had a vote, I would have to vote no. Thank you.
What I have to say is very brief. Jay, your candid and honest synopsis, as painful as it is, of the state of the state here is welcome, I guess, and long overdue. I was hoping that you would expand a little further on the impact of our union situation on what's happening here and why we are forced to even suggest these cuts to our youth, to our disabled, to our working people of New York. And it was welcome, Andrew, that you expanded a bit on our union situation and what it's costing the MTA. And when one of the speakers today, many of the speakers, but one in particular, discussed where did the fare increase go, where did that money go, where did the bottle tax go, and all these things, so much of it is going to the taxi tax. So much of it is going to our union members and the unrealistic work rules and the unrealistic increase that they've received. And my mom, who died young of cancer, always said life isn't fair, and I know life isn't fair, but it is really unfair that one large group is not being affected by the economic downturn, and another large group, for example, our youth and our disabled and our working people, are having to pay the price. Just the price of the angst of not knowing where their situation is going to be, and what, as Commissioner Kay said, every 2 months having to hear another possibility of how their life will change because of the MTA's economic situation. That's it.
I feel like this is a bad Groundhog Day movie. I'm waiting for Bill Murray to jump into the bathtub with a toaster oven and then keep repeating it over and over again. About a year ago at this time, we had, I guess for lack of a better word, Doomsday 1, and this board took an approach that, and I certainly, and I agree with many of the things that Andrew said, although I wouldn't want this to all be directed at labor. There were a lot of decisions made, political decisions, and the emphasis on how difficult our capital budget financing has strangled this agency. And that should, that emphasis needs to be championed as much as whatever labor reforms that need to be made on a going forward basis. But anyway, essentially at that time we undertook a process which we passed Doomsday 1 with the idea that we'd go out into the community and put the plan out there and rally for to examine what the real impact of it was. And almost every member of this board sat through the same 45 hours of hearings that I sat through, neighborhood by neighborhood, detailing the essentially the horrors of what eliminating the service cuts that were being proposed as part of Doomsday 1 would do to them. And so I'm essentially sickened by the idea that here we are a year later, faced again with the prospect of having to go out and do this all again, and put community after community to the test of coming out and telling us the pain that they're going to suffer, when I know, in speaking with all of you, that you realize what that is, and that there is very little support, if any, to in fact do that. These bus cuts are going to leave people stranded and unable to get to work in any sense of a mass transit fashion. The elderly will not be able to get to the doctor. We're as proposed, threatening the ability of kids to get to school safely. It is just a sickening prospect to be faced with the realization of what we have to deal with in the coming months. We didn't deal these cards, as has been correctly stated. the rescue plan, not for the MTA, but for the riders of this region, didn't rescue anybody. It has fell short, and unfortunately, the law doesn't permit us to not take a vote and not pass a budget. If we could just stop the clock and say, okay, we're not going to pass a budget until we all can come to a consensus on what should be done here, that is the action that we should do. And some of the speakers suggested that, and I think that we probably all agree that. I have had enough conversations with you all to say that there is no unanimity on this plan as it is currently formatted. In fact, I think that there's a lot of support for what I would call the Russian-off amendments. And I am a disciple of that school of thought, as now adopted apparently by the council speaker and Jimmy Vacco, who I guess is campaigning for transportation chair in the new council. But as I said to Andrew as we sat through those many nights a year ago, and with many of you sharing different spots on the podium, I am committed to the elimination of these service cuts. And so the question is really, how do we get there? Last year the strategy was to, in fact, go up to Albany and to put a full court press on and gather the troops. And I still think that needs to be part of this, because Albany is clearly part of the problem and they need to be part of the solution. I think our partner in the City of New York needs to be part of the solution, and I'm interested to see what role the Speaker of the City Council wants to play in helping us deal with some of the issues together with the Mayor's representatives, who I know have been very diligent in helping us to deal with the problems that are here. So the question is, what approach do we take this year? If for Doomsday 2, we have a new chair. I'm terribly impressed by his forthrightness and his commitment to tame the beast, which we all know needs to be tamed, and this place needs to get administratively smaller. The Staten Island Assemblyman Lou Tobacco asked me to emphasize freezing the overtime, and I know that is something our chair has talked about, but I said I would raise it publicly. So shout out to Assemblyman Tobacco. Yes, we need to reduce overtime costs. We need to come up with new ideas. It's not our job to implement them, but we are the advocates for transportation, the transportation riders in this region. And just as we went up and had ideas last year as we pushed for, I guess, Ravage 1 and modified Ravage Plan, or whatever you want to call them, I'm committed to be part of that effort, whether it be in Albany or in the City Council or in Washington, D.C., for Stimulus 2, when those conversations take place. I think an idea that I would like to see advanced is what I would call a modified version of the Mayor's congestion pricing plan, or the tolling of the free bridges. As somebody who lives in a community that's required to cross a bridge to get anywhere, and who has very little mass transit and is captive by the Verrazano Bridge, Staten Islanders are appalled that they have to pay and that other people don't. A fairer system would toll interborough travel from one borough to another. A plan could be implemented that would essentially allow somebody the access to all of the bridges at one rate for the day if they were residents of the Metropolitan Transit Authority region. You would no longer have people rushing to free bridges, as Andrew pointed out. Everybody would be treated exactly the same, and nobody could complain. The residents of the Far Rockaways, being told to go within their, having tolls to go within their community is something that I find absolutely mind-boggling. To go back and forth to school with your kids and have to pay a toll, for us to cut that out, at the end of the day, that is something that I will not support as well. Let's see. Anyway, because the chairman deserves the same consideration as the former chairman did when I engaged in a leap of faith with him a year ago, not knowing him that well, being new to this process. I'm going to vote with the chair today and out of respect for my colleagues here, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. It would be easy for me to just cast a no vote and be a hero to people as the only person to, I believe the only person to cast a no vote, since Mr. Seabrook is not here today. However, I will put it on record that were he here, he probably would cast a negative vote. However, rest assured that when this matter comes up again, as it will, and when we actually adopt a plan, my vote will not be for many of these cuts as they exist today. So I am essentially voting to stop the clock, pass a plan that makes us essentially legal as a fiduciary of this institution, a fact that I take very seriously, without the legislature passing another law to have me perform that function. I will diligently attend every public hearing that I can physically make. I will work with you all to hopefully restore these cuts and to make this institution smaller administratively, in support of our chairman's desire and Vice Chairman Saul and others who have been trying to reduce our costs and give us greater credibility. But I will not let Albany, Washington, or the City of New York off the hook for their responsibility to come up with public policy that adequately deals with the needs of the 10 million people that we serve on a daily basis. So that's where I stand.
I was looking at an economic chart book as part of my leisure reading, and looking at this recession versus the 9 that preceded it, and it's unprecedented. There's been nothing quite like this really since the 30s. And when you fall very far, very fast, sometimes you don't realize the extent of your injuries until you try to get up. And this economy right now is trying to get up. I think it's dawned on the governor that things are extremely perilous. I don't think it has dawned on the legislature that they are. And that's part of the reason why we're in the mess that we're in. I think that there are a lot of solutions, like I think everyone else around the table. I plan on voting for this budget because we do have to meet our fiduciary responsibilities and pass a balanced budget. However, last night, the House, it was introduced in the House, Stimulus 2, which I certainly hope will provide us as much funding as Stimulus 1 did. And 10% of that money can be ledgered over to operations. Again, because these are extraordinary times, I will vociferously support transferring 10% of that money over to operations. In addition, on the theory that you don't continue to build an extension on your house when you can't pay the rent, I think we should be taking our PAYGO money next year and dedicating it towards offsetting these heinous service cuts. When I think of going back to public hearings and facing the people that we faced last year, it just makes me sick at those cuts. When it comes to school fares, the way I describe it, this agency is in an abusive relationship with 2 deadbeat dads. One of them has stopped support payments altogether. And the other one said, says, I'm going to go back to 1994, and I'm not paying you a nickel more than I paid you in 1994, despite the fact that costs have gone up. Now, if this were the real world, maybe their wages would be garnished, maybe their car would be impounded, maybe they'd go to jail. But this is the wacky world of government. So who gets blamed? Us. I'm not sitting still for that, and the children suffer, absolutely. I remember, and I'm dating myself now, and I think, Jay, we're in the same generation. When I went to high school, beginning in 1969, there were bus passes. And they were little colored cards, little thin colored cards that you'd show to the bus driver. And they weren't free. And I remember my mother sitting at the kitchen table and figuring out, okay, Doreen takes 6 buses to get to and from school, one of them being the BX14. And does it make sense to buy the bus pass this month, or are there a couple of holidays where she won't be going to school? It was that fine a point. The moral of this story is the city charged parents for their kids to go to school. I don't like charging families in economic times like this, but we cannot shoulder this burden ourselves. We cannot ask paratransit riders to go to the nearest accessible spot using a van, get on a subway, get off the subway, call the van service again to go to their next appointment. That's just not going to work. I don't think, while I agree we should be looking at yellow cabs, I certainly know that there are neighborhoods throughout the boroughs where you don't see a yellow cab. They don't troll the streets looking for fares. And try to find a yellow cab at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Midtown Manhattan when all the out-of-service lights are on. So we have to find real solutions to these problems, and we have to insist that our funding partners stop playing games and pinning the blame on this agency. We now have a guy at the helm with financial acumen who hopefully is going to help us get our house in order. We're going to do our share. Government has to do their share, the mayor and the legislature. That's the only way we're going to get out of this mess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all agree that this budget stinks for a lot of reasons, and none of us want to pass this budget as it is. Some very hard statements have been made by a lot of my fellow board members. I agree with many of them. A lot of suggestions have been made, tolling the untolled bridges, other things that we need to look into. The City Council has made some suggestions that we need to look into. Everybody's here talking the talk, sir. Now we've got to walk the walk. And the first step is to pass this budget and get ourselves into the hearings and into the process of looking at the information that everybody here believes will save us some money or get us some money or any other way that we can avoid some of this pain. I'll support this budget today. Like most members here, I believe that what will change before we take that final vote, and I'm crossing my fingers and dedicating my time to see that we can try to pull it out in a better way than what we have here right now. But today I'll vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we have today is a bunch of numbers on lots of pieces of paper, which together consolidated into our 2010 budget. But that's just what it is just numbers. It's not the implementation of any of these plans. It's not a variety of other ideas that may or may not come to fruition as we go into 2010. And it's not a series of decisions which this board wants to make. I agree with my fellow commissioner. It feels like we were just here yesterday, let alone a year ago, doing the same thing and going through the same situation. However, this time I think there are two differences. Number one, I don't believe, notwithstanding the fact that these issues and these revenue shortfalls, if you can call it that, revenue miscalculations is a much better term by the Department of Taxation and Finance of the state of New York. Those were done by government.
And I don't think we can rely on those partners anymore to come to our aid. I do not believe the other levels of government are going to come down and give us a wishing well anymore. I think we have to solve them ourselves. Now, that's part of what this budget is in a very short period of time, trying to solve numbers, trying to make sure that the revenue number equals the expense number, because that's what we are legally required to do. And that's the other aspect that I think is very important. We are today fulfilling our legal fiduciary responsibility under the laws of the state of New York. I don't think anybody around this table feels we are fulfilling our moral obligation to the residents of this region and the commuters, whether they happen to be city commuters or railroad commuters. And that, I think, is the opportunity we have as we go along in the next couple of months to try to move from the legal responsibility that we are going to adhere to today, because otherwise somebody is going to come down at us and say we violated whatever section of the public authorities law it is, which Jay and I know, to what is best for the citizens of this region. And I mean, in that case, all the citizens, whether they are the school children in the city of New York or the paratransit constituents or the residents of West Hempstead who will lose their weekend service, or the people in Metro North who will be affected. It's a wide-ranging group of constituents, and I don't think we can or should single out one group or another. Everybody is in this together. But I think this authority has an obligation to look at these things together. There have been a variety of new options put on the table, some of which I may agree with, some of which I have great difficulty with. I have great difficulty in moving capital money to operating. I'm not yet convinced that that is the way to go. I want to see all other options first before I would agree to that, because that's the problem we had in the 70s when we did that, and it took us a very, very long time to change the negative consequences of that. So I'm not yet ready to accept that. I understand there may be others on this board who may have different views, and that's understandable. But I think that's an issue we have to discuss and discuss at length in the next couple of months as we go along. So I will support this budget, not because I want to, not because I agree with whatever is in it. I'm still waiting for my half-hour off-peak service to Ronkonkoma. We seem to be going the opposite way, not the way to get to that. And one of these years we'll get to that, along with lots of other things that I think members of this board want to do. But I will support this because we do have a legal responsibility to do it, and I think we'll all use the next number of months to try to find opportunities, options, cost savings, whatever they may be, to fulfill our moral obligation to the residents of this region. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just have a few things to add. I definitely support Doreen's comments about school fares. I want to say on a personal level, I also went to school and had to pay. I only had to pay for 2 months out of the year going in one direction. This was in the dark days of the late 70s, immediately after the fiscal crisis. I went to Stuyvesant High School. And I'll impart a little bit of the story. I was just given a certain amount of money. So sometimes the choice was, well, okay, the statute's probably run, I can say this. Sometimes you had to jump the turnstile to get to school. So that was the choice that we had to make, and the trains were late, and it was an awful situation. It was worse than it was today because the service on the train system was abominable. And we had to rely on that and often be late to school. I don't think children should pay at all to get to school. I think that violates the state constitution. That's my thinking. Okay, but the MTA should not have to pay for it. And who should pay for it is the people who provide the education, and that's the state and the city. And they should pay for it. Our only error here in bringing this up now is that we didn't bring it up previously. And it's been over 10 years. I remember when this was done, I was working in the state legislature. It annoyed me to no end. And it's time. It's good we brought it up. We should bring up. There should maybe other things in our budget where the state and the city are not paying us for what we're providing. On the Russian-off plan, as people call it, and I call it that too. Gene had actually sent it to me. I was hesitant when I first saw it, as all of us would be, to trade capital for operating, knowing the history of that. Back in the 70s, again, the dark days of the 70s, that was done to the detriment of the system. We're in tough times now. I think what we need to see to make a decision about that is to know what we are sacrificing, what projects would not be done or be deferred if we cashed in stimulus, if we cashed in that $50 million pay-as-you-go. I think we need to see that. Regarding the Long Island Railroad specifically, because people don't mention this, the biggest cut on Long Island Railroad service happens to be a Queens cut, and that's on the Port Washington branch. A few years ago, off-peak half-hour service was added for the Port Washington branch. I know Ronkonkoma is still waiting. And now we see that cut back. The trains are not lightly traveled. There are a lot of people on those trains. It's good service. It keeps people off the roads, and I would hate to see it go, and it would hurt, disproportionately hurt New York City, Queens in particular. We do have to show our choices, I think, in the budget. I mean, we need to be given choices. The public needs to be given to be shown these choices. So I think we will gain credibility that way, and we have to do that. As far as I mentioned about the capital, I think a budget should show a choice that the choice is this: either we make the students pay, or someone comes up with the money. I mean, either way, it's fine for us. But I think that's something we have to state publicly. And whichever way works for us, that would be fine. Again, I support you totally in trying to rework the MTA, because direct service to passengers should be the priority, and everything else should flow from that. And if it doesn't, we have to really take a hard look at that and say, how does this affect? Does this help service? Does it not? And I think that's the question that has to be asked. On that, I would like to say it's still Hanukkah. I'm praying for a miracle for next year, that the funding we have lasts us for the full 12 months. Thank you.
Mark?
That last statement, I think, is really that the funding we have needs to last for the 12 months. I think is really the essence of our existence in a way. We provide an essential service, and we can't allow that essential service to be interrupted, and that means that we have to have the money to pay for the level of service we're going to provide. The budget before us has been put together on an extremely fast schedule to accommodate very recent drastic changes in the resources we can count on, we think, for the coming year. And it focuses on elements that we do control in terms of how we run this agency and provide service. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said about the undesirability of service cuts. On the other hand, service cuts are something that we can actually do as an agency in an effort to stretch the money we think we can count on through the 12 months it has to cover. And that's a problem that we have to deal with. This budget is a part of our responsibility to keep the agency going, and the vote today is a part of that responsibility. People lament the fact that we've been here before. I mean, we were complaining about no money a year ago. Well, I mean, the fact is circumstances change. Budgets are forecasts of the future. When things happen, you have to react to them and readjust to address the circumstances that you're faced with. They're not sort of fixed, finite objects. They have to adjust as you go along. The matters in them take time to think through, and the choices in them take time, and the ways of influencing the political process of the state and its resources, the city and its resources are difficult and time-consuming. As has been said earlier, we're in a process here. I think we all very much hope that the service impacts that are contained in the budget in front of us, in one way or another, as circumstances evolve, will be avoidable, and that's something that we're going to work on very actively going forward. But it is always in the context that we are ultimately responsible for maintaining an essential service in this region, and we must act in a way that makes certain that we can do exactly that.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on these matters. I'll start out on something I know very little of. Little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and I'll move to something I know a little bit more about, and perhaps you'll be tolerant of me getting through the first part. The first section here is regarding the flex of money from capital to operating, which is sort of admittedly a desperation move, but these are desperate times, and it's been a long-held position of mine, which I've articulated to the two prior chairmen, and will articulate to you when you have time in your schedule. I don't know when that would be, to listen to my position on that. But it is, as I said before, clearly a desperation move, and clearly an aspect of that is based on the history of the previous periods when capital was taken to use for operating and not replaced, and the long-held position of the federal government has been to prohibit that, but the federal government has recognized in the last year that we are in special circumstances, and that we should be looking at it as special circumstances, not as a way to do business. On the other hand, and this is the part where I admit my thoughts are a little bit muddled, where the fear is that if capital is flexed to operating, federal money is flexed to operating, that the state government and the city government will not be forthcoming with the funds they were previously forthcoming with. And this was part of a piece of legislation called the Matsui Bill, was a system referred to as, I believe, maintenance of effort was what they systemized it and referred to it as maintenance of effort. And when the maintenance of effort, there was a trigger in the legislation when the maintenance of effort was not maintained. I know it sounds redundant, but when it's not maintained, that you could not, in that instance, flex the money from capital to operating. Now, all that said, again, I admit to being muddled, and little knowledge is a dangerous thing, but it appears to me that what's happened with this agency's funding over time has been sort of the mirror image of that, where the state government, and to a lesser extent the city government, the state government over time has tended to borrow capital funds and let that interest be paid out of operating. And at this insidious effect, year in and year out, I guess for the last 14 years, has helped to dig us the hole we're into. And so I don't see why the same rule does not apply in reverse, so that in effect what you're doing here is funding capital with operating. Well, why would then the state government provide capital? Why would that not? Why does that other side of the equation not apply? And I admit this is not my area of expertise. Now, my area of expertise is the labor side, and for some reason I find myself the only labor representative here today. And I don't shy away from the discussion of work rules, but I suggest that, first of all, your characterization that labor has done nothing in this period to help you out is simply incorrect. Or it's your viewpoint. I mean, you know, people look at the same thing and see opposite depending on what your self-interest is. And we have a saying in the labor movement that what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. And I suggest the only real way to get at work rules is by negotiating. And the fact that you did not negotiate this last somewhat pattern-setting agreement with Local 100, that it was not your responsibility. You weren't even here. Like I say, you were 3,000 miles away when all this went down. But nonetheless, negotiation didn't settle that. Arbitration settled that. Now, when you go to arbitrate work rules, each work rule has, and you can characterize them as archaic all you want. And I recognize as an accountant they must look archaic. Well, you know, funny thing, I think accountants have some pretty archaic work rules too. And everybody thinks somebody else has archaic work rules. And but what happened was you turned over this very complex negotiation that could concern work rules, which the most committed practitioners have trouble doing. The unions have different constituencies that support each one of these work rules. And managers have to know precisely what they ask for in these work rules. When you change a work rule, a lot of these work rules that are now archaic are things that management wanted years ago. So the unions conceded, okay, we'll give you that work rule. Well, now it's become an archaic work rule, when previously it was something you wanted. And this is sort of the history of how this has gone down. Well, you know, people have to step up to the, I mean, I've always tried to, anybody here that's dealt with me in collective bargaining, and several people are here that have dealt with me in collective, know that I've always tried to let old jobs die, let new jobs come to life. That's the history of the industrial age, and that's what we're trying to do. We're not Luddites. We like modern equipment. We try to do as much as possible. Well, now, when you look at the last 10 months, though, what have you done regarding labor beyond letting a deputy mayor decide what the arbitration was? So you've turned over the technical aspect of the negotiation to people who don't know a thing about running railroads, who don't know a thing about where these work rules derive from. Lawyer, you turned it over to a series of lawyers and deputy mayors. And really, the result was not surprising to me or to anyone else, I think, that given the city pattern, the result was entirely predictable. And we could have predicted last year at least that part of this equation would have come forward. Well, you know, in the last year, you've eliminated a lot of positions that are, you know, you may not be what your administrations referred to as hard service, in the sense that it's not steel rail and steel wheel. But believe me, my daughter doesn't like getting off the train at that station with no booth. She doesn't care if the person in the booth was asleep. And which I do care. It's embarrassing when you see someone not doing their job. It's certainly embarrassing when the media focuses on the people who do not do their job, the very few people who do not do their job in the system. On the other hand, it's a substantially worse station without that attendant in that booth. And by God, you know what's happened? Now the panhandlers are drifting down into the station. They were they were standing at the top of the stairs. Now they're, you know, it's getting to be winter, so they're coming down actually in the station. And there's nobody there to shoo them away. You know, you got a camera maybe, I don't know what you got, but there's nobody there to shoo them away. And in the suburban areas, the eliminations are, you know, as a city person, you know, you don't want to be stuck in a hole. But on the other hand, you really want to be on some of these platforms alone in the off hours too. So you have eliminated those jobs. Also, in this budget, you have the a holiday on making your pension payments. So now you have a situation where you're funding the capital program by not funding the pensions. And it's it's many ways it's like an animal caught in a trap. You have to, you know, cut off your leg, I guess, to get out of the trap. But these are obligations you're going to be stuck with long into the future. These are long-term investments, just like your changes in the capital plan. This capital plan's a 30-year thing. Well, you know, you're planning for service 30 years from now, and tomorrow you're cutting service. And that is a very complicated situation. Now, with regard to the archaic work rules, you know, we do try to negotiate when we can negotiate. You have to negotiate these things. It's the only real way to get at them. There are legislative changes to certain operating practices, which I assume you're going to pursue. And, if you're setting up a situation where you don't really need the commitment of labor, you go ahead and do what you got to do in Albany. And these cuts are so bad that it's conceivably that the politicians are not going to have much sympathy for anybody's work rules here, and accountants or workers or unionized workers. But in that regard, there are certain metrics that reflect efficiencies, and Metro North is by any metric the most efficient commuter railroad in the country. Now, yeah, there are work rules there. Some of them include overtime. Perhaps Lou Tobacco should be told overtime, when you're cutting 700 positions, overtime's going to occur. And maybe the accountants could tell them that overtime's the cheapest hour of the day. And anybody that does collective bargaining knows overtime's mandatory. That's my biggest issue with overtime is some guy says, I don't want to work overtime tomorrow. The boss says, well, hey, you got to. It's mandatory. Maybe you should negotiate something in the contract that says overtime will be prohibited. Nobody shall work more than 40 hours. You know what? Union will like that. There'd be more people to be hired. Now, when you're hitting the salaries of these employees, and certainly high-level people here, if you make $200,000 and you take a $20,000 cut, it's a substantial cut. But a lot of the people you'll be hitting here are much lower. Those lower-level people, the managers here, the salaried people, first of all, they've been froze for a couple years. Now, those are the people that you expect to manage overtime and make it magically go away in Lou Tobacco's world. And it's simply not going to happen. So if you want these work rules, you want to eliminate the archaic character of them, I suggest the only way to do it is peer-to-peer bargaining, and sooner the better.
My comments will be brief. I certainly support and agree with many of the comments made by my fellow board members. Clearly, the thing that is driving this whole discussion today is the need for more money. Management was faced with two choices: either finding the money necessary through these extraordinary sets of circumstances through a series of much broader service cuts, if you will, death by 1,000 cuts, or going after some clear inequities in our overall operating paradigm. They chose to do the latter, and if that has the effect of moving the process in a more long-term and a more long-term salutary direction, then I would be in favor of it. People need to step up to their responsibilities, and the free riders, in a sense, need to meet their responsibilities. I certainly support the chairman's call for greater efficiency within the agency. I'm not sure that we'll be making enough savings to significantly change the operating paradigm or the need for subsidies of this agency in this incredibly important function that we perform. However, it will change and improve the credibility so that when we speak about our need for money, the world will sit up and take us seriously and come to our and carry out their responsibilities in that regard as well. To violate the very basic principle of using capital funds to support operating expenses, I think is a serious error. And as my friend Norman has stated. I think it allows other partners in our overall financial situation off the hook, and that is not something which should be allowed to happen. It's a slippery slope, and it's one that I personally don't think we should be on. At the end of the day, the economics of operating this system will need to be more intelligently and permanently dealt with, and if this budget serves as a catalyst to getting that done, then so be it.
I know that Don wanted to speak, and if possible, then I'd like to draw this to a close in discussion.
Yeah, pretty much everything has been said, except for the fact that I go along with Norman that we do need to negotiate a bunch of the work rules with the unions, and as you identified early on, that we have to take very severe steps in cutting down the administrative structure as much as we can and making it more efficient, because our job is to serve the public, and none of us want to make any more cuts than we have to. Having said that, I think it's also important to recognize that our cuts that we're talking about are roughly 3% of our budget, meaning that 97% of our budget is still in hand, and that the public is going to be responsive even if we have to take these steps, that 97% will continue to operate with the efficiency and the structure that we've been providing the public with up to this point in time. I would like to comment that nobody has brought up the fact that our subsidies to a large extent have been based on a mortgage tax, which to me has always been an absurdity in itself, to have a totally cyclical operation in terms of providing a subsidy for us. And I think there should be some pressure on the legislature to understand the fact that we need to have something that provides a permanent subsidy stream rather than something that is subject to violent ups and downs. Obviously, I think all of us have no choice but to vote for the budget and hope that we can straighten out some of the problems involved. Thank you.
Okay, Mark.
Mr. Chairman, you proposed a budget that you did not want to propose, but fiscal necessity required it. All of us on this board do not want to vote for it, but we are supporting you because fiscal necessity requires it. And what you have not heard today very much of is, I'm not voting for this because of the hit to transit, which was severe. I'm not voting for this because of what it does to Nassau County or what it does to Metro North, assuming anything bad is happening to Metro North. Everyone on this board realizes that we are all in this together, and that every single board member, no matter how they got here or where they are from, realizes that we have to support the transportation system as a whole. In a way, the MTA has really grown up, because it didn't used to be that way, and I think you should be proud of this board just as we're proud of you.
Thank you. I think everyone has spoken very clearly about the budget, and I do appreciate the comments being made. I think they are, as some would say, spot on. I wish we weren't here. As I said at the beginning, was certainly not my intent to have this type of discussion with this board. Having said that, I very, very much appreciate the support that's been expressed today by all the members of the board, a recognition of what we have to do as a board to be able to do with the circumstance. To reiterate the point that I made at the beginning, this is a budget, it is a plan. In adopting a budget today, you are, in fact, starting the process of public hearing and public discussion. So this is the beginning, not the end. In addition, I would say on a personal basis that it is only a weekend ago that I began to look at the service change package, which I'd hoped I would never have to look at. And I think we should all know that we will take a little bit of time at the beginning of the year to look with a little less rush perspective at that service change package, so that we can put forth to the board as appropriate any changes that might help to optimize that and account for things that we've done previously. I don't think that will change the fact that we have to have a service change package. It's just about trying to do it in a way that at least would be best and put in front of public hearings, a package that is one that we think we've taken a second look at. So I will commit to you to do that over the next few weeks. With that, I now would ask you for a motion in favor of adoption of the MTA's Consolidated and Agency 2009 final estimates, the 2010 Consolidated and Agency final proposed budgets, and the 4-year financial plan for 2010 to 13. These are contained more fully in the staff summaries and the related materials that have been described to the board.
Move it.
Second? In favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Continuing our business, the next item is the Governance Committee. The Governance Committee met earlier this month. You have in front of you 5 specific items for the board's approval. To be clear, there are revisions to the All-Agency Code of Ethics and to the Board Code of Ethics, revisions to the governance guidelines, revisions to the MTA's bylaws, revisions to the board committee charters, and approval of labor governance guidelines that had been drafted for the board's consideration. They're all in the package. I would ask to see if we can have them as a vote in one vote. Can I have a motion on those, please?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Report from the Committee on Finance.
Mr. Chairman, there are no action items or procurements. There are no action items or procurements this month, and that concludes the Finance Committee report.
Ms. Frasca will hopefully show the same efficiency.
It's on one page, that's all I'll say. First, a warm welcome to President Prendergast, and congratulations on getting through your first and rather eventful board meeting. We hope there are many more to come. On behalf of the Transit Committee, I present the following for the board's approval. There are 15 New York City transit procurements totaling $21.3 million for a non-competitive amount of $3.2 million. The committee recommends them, and I move them.
In favor?
Aye.
There are 10 competitive procurements in the amount of $17.8 million. The committee recommends them, and I move them.
Aye. In favor? Thank you.
One
Okay.
ratification in the amount of $300,000. The committee recommends it, and I move it. With regard to bus, for MTA Bus, there's one non-competitive procurement this month in the amount of $570,000. The committee recommends it, and I move it.
In favor?
Aye.
Thank
We
you.
are done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Long Island Railroad, Long Island Bus. Mitch Pally, please.
Mr. Chairman, there are 3 non-competitive procurements in the amount of $238,000. The proposed procurement with New York State Industries with the disabled has been withdrawn and will not be moved before the board today. I recommend these procurements and I move them.
Second? In favor? Thank you. Long Island Bus?
There are 3 competitive procurements in the amount of $5,530,000. I recommend these procurements and I move them.
Thank you.
And there are no ratifications. Long Island Bus, there is one non-competitive procurement in the amount of $60,000. The committee recommends this procurement and I move it.
Second. In favor? Thank you.
And there is one competitive procurement in the amount of $367,803. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second.
And there are no ratifications. This concludes the Long Island Committee report.
Terrific. Jim.
Mr. Chairman, Metro North operated at 98.2% on time for the month of November.
Nothing will dissuade the on-time report.
I'd like to present the following item for the board's approval. There were 2 non-competitive procurements totaling $320,000. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second. Thank you. Mitch, back to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Vote, yes. In favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
There are 4 competitive procurements totaling $303,105,000, and I move them.
Second. In favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now that concludes. Thank you. Mitch, back to you quickly.
Bridges and Tunnels Committee met this month. There are no non-competitive procurements or ratifications. There are 7 competitive procurements in the amount of $13,948,000, and the committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Okay. And then the Capital Construction Planning and Real Estate Committee. Nancy?
Yes, there was one action item. I'd like a vote on the action item.
Motion made.
In favor?
Aye.
And we'll vote these together. Pardon me, there are no non-competitive procurements. However, there are 2 competitive procurements. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Okay, regarding the real estate portion of the meeting, the committee reviewed and recommended a total of 8 real estate items for board approval. I move them.
Second. In favor?
Aye.
Okay, that concludes it.
Thank you. I would like to ask for a motion to move into executive session, please.
Motion made.
Thank you. The matter to be discussed in executive session consistent with the open meetings law will concern collective bargaining and litigation matters, specifically involving the litigation over the TW Local 100 contract. Thank you very much. If I can ask to clear this room, with the exception of the board members, Tom Prendergast, Joe Smith, Ben Fernandez. Thank you. We ready?
Yes, Chairman. With such a large capital program, I don't know how many billions of dollars, what would be the harm in taking just a small, relatively small amount, $50 million here or there, to offset some of these service cuts? I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean the whole house of cards has to fall and then suddenly we're going to go back to the 70s and all the capital funds disappear.
You know, Pete, I actually expect that the discussion that took place in the 70s started with exactly the discussion that you're talking about right now. The reality is that we have the experience coming out of the city's fiscal crisis that taking money from the capital budget and moving it to the operating budget, what started us on a slippery slope of allowing our transit system to decline in a way that took us literally 20 years to climb out of that hole. And so I think it is a significant step. I think we should think extremely carefully before we look to the capital program for operating support.
Are you saying you would not support that?
I'm saying that we should look extremely carefully. The budget that we have adopted today does not do that, and I don't believe we should be doing that. Clearly, people have made the point, and our board members have made the point, that they would continue to like us to they would like us to continue to think about that, think carefully about that, and I will. But it is a very, very difficult path.
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Bloomberg has proposed to have congestion pricing be brought back as a possibility for raising revenues for your agency. I wonder how you look at that.
Well, I think certainly we're looking at a long-term continuing need to be able to support the transit system. The question as to whether that need should be met through congestion pricing or bridge tolls or taxes or other needs is something to be considered by the state and the city, our elected officials, and I believe they've considered it previously. If they want to consider it going forward, they'll consider it.
I mean, would you have a recommendation for them, given the fact that you have had experience with it in London?
The recommendation is that one of the reasons why it worked in London was because the political process took its decision, and then we worked for execution and implementation. I think we're still at the stage of the political process, considering what it wants to be able to do.
If things get financially worse, do you absolutely allow fair increases in 2010, even if things get worse financially?
It's certainly my intention to stay with the fare schedule that had been previously put forth, which calls for regular fare increases and regular toll increases in 2011 and 2013. It would be fair to say that there remains risk even in the budget that was adopted today, and we will continue to monitor the situation go forward. But it is my clear intent to try to stay with the idea of regularly scheduled fare increases. I think that's one of the best things that came out of the Ravitch recommendation. I think it would be helpful for people all across the region to know how we're going to handle that. I'd like to see us do that.
I have a question. You spoke pretty harshly about labor and the unions. How much of this budget mess is the union's fault?
No, I don't think I spoke harshly about labor and the unions at all. I said what I tried to say was that as you look at our need to be able to restructure the cost of the MTA, to take this place apart, labor is a part of that. The reality is that we have 70,000 employees in this company. The vast majority of the monies that we spend go to our workforce. We have 70,000 dedicated men and women in the company. But We need to find ways to be more productive, and what I said was we need to engage with our labor partners to be able to do that.
Jay, you mentioned in searching for efficiencies that, there would be, the MTA can't be afraid to lay off workers. What kind of resistance do you think you'll be met with on the union side?
Well, I don't think anyone likes to see layoffs. And I think that the reality is that that's the situation we have. The point that I was making was that the budget that we have adopted today includes layoffs that are there. And as we look at the process of making the MTA more efficient, a process that I think everybody supports, we have to recognize that layoffs will be part of that process and that we will not shy away from it.
Mr. Chairman, you said that this is only the beginning of a process, not the end, suggesting that something might happen between now and next June when these plans have to be implemented. What are you hoping for? What do you expect?
Well, I said it as the beginning of the process in the sense that we should recognize that the board adopting a budget today was adopting a plan. There is a public process that is required and we should go through for public hearings. We take input in regard to that. There will be further votes of the board in the spring to be able to adopt the actions as necessary, the specific actions as necessary to meet the budget requirements that are here. We also know that in between the period between December and when we'll be doing this, the state will be grappling with its budget process for its next fiscal year, and it'll be important for us to be able to see the outcome of that as well.
How significantly changed do you think this package of cuts will be once it's finally implemented in the middle of next year?
I haven't had a great opportunity to be able to go through the package in detail. Clearly, it went through a rigorous process with the board previously when we went through. What I don't want to leave any impression is that I think we're magically going to find a set of service actions that don't have painful impacts. The reality is that in a region like we have here that is so fundamentally dependent on public transit, changing the public transit system in the way that we're going to have to talk about to be able to save the kind of dollars we're talking about here, with the loss taking away of $400 million in a very short period of time, there won't be an answer that takes away pain in that process. But we may be able to look at it, we may be able to do it a little bit better, and I, at least on a personal basis, would like a little bit of time and space to be able to see how we might do that.
Mr. Chairman, when you hear the governor yesterday say that you ought to rethink the cuts and the Assembly Speaker hours later assure the public on camera that some of these cuts will never take effect, how tempted are you to tell these officials to put up the cash or shut up?
Well, I think we've heard from elected officials in both houses of the legislature and the governor that they would prefer not to see these actions take place. Undoubtedly, there'll be engagement that continues with Albany around that. I think we will work with them. We will try to see it happen. There is no desire to see this happen. Again, I can't state enough. I came back to the MTA just 2 months ago with a program of trying to see us improve our services, not take it the other way. If we can get back to that, nobody would be happier than I am.
Let me just follow up on my question quickly. Yesterday, Mayor Bloomberg said that the concept of taking away the student Metro card was, to quote him, atrocious. The city's contribution towards that has declined in recent years. How would you think? Would you ask Mayor Bloomberg to increase the city's contribution? And how much would the city and state have to give back for you to take the student Metro card issue off the table?
I think the question of student Metro cards is fundamentally a question for government about how they support that. In this instance, the transit system is simply the service provider. It's not making a political judgment about student Metro cards. I think what we have to keep in mind is our goal is not just to carry the students from September to December, but we want to be able to carry them through the school year. And frankly, we want to have an outcome coming out of this if we're going to go down that path, and I hope we do. We have an outcome coming out of it that gives parents some assurance that this is a service that will be secure and not something that we go through this again.
Mr. Chairman, in your comments before the vote, you said you were outlining all the administrative positions, overtime, etc., the bureaucratic bloat, as it were, said this is something that you thought board members would support, but there hasn't been the buy-in. What did you mean by that? Do you think that past administrations haven't supported making the MTA leaner?
Well, I think the reality is that the MTA is where it is. I think there have been views expressed by board members pushing the MTA to be able to become a leaner, more efficient organization. We have not, in my mind, achieved that in the place where we are right now. And I think the main thing that I wanted the board to know was I agree with them. My initial view coming in is that the MTA can be leaner, it can be more efficient, it can be more productive, and that they have my support and the support of all of our agency presidents to be able to achieve that.
You described congestion pricing, East River tolls as still being at the stages of the political process. But as chairman, you occupy an important and influential role in that political process. Do you plan on using your position to advocate for new sources of revenue for the MTA?
I plan in the first instance on using my position to show the taxpayers of the state of New York that we are using all of the money that we are receiving as effectively as possible. That is my first order of business right now.
You said, sir, you're going to take the place apart. Is there a percentage that you have in mind, having been here for a few months, that you think is in effect wasted at this point? And what exactly do you mean by take the place apart?
I won't give you a percentage today. I think if we're going to start with percentages, we're going to be back to what I'll call a peg process in which we're going for a target of a certain amount in doing it. I think that we need to look across all areas of the company. We need to take all of the functional areas in this company, which cut across every one of our business units, which cut across headquarters. We need to look for the redundancies that are there. We need to look for the places in which we are not moving efficiently to be able to do things. We need to take and ensure that every dollar of overtime is being spent well. I accept that overtime is an important part of running a business like this as an operating environment. I do not accept that every part of what we are doing today is going well. We need to take apart and look at the way that we are purchasing materials and the way that we deal with our inventory. Companies all across the country have spent effort doing this, and they are defining new and different ways of doing this that have changed sometime between 1904 and today. We need to be able to do this in an environment that we're operating today. We need to look at every element of our business like that, our IT, our telecoms, every single element of it, turn every element over, look for the savings that's there, essentially bring it right back down to the bottom and only build up what we need to be able to do. Now, that's a process that begins now. It's hard, it's painful, but it's a process that begins now. It will be going on. It will be going on starting from now and moving forward. Rather than give a percentage, I'd rather make the following point about it. It should start and it should not stop until we really can give that assurance to the taxpayers that all the money is being used effectively.
Time for two more, Alfonso and then Rich.
How long do you think this process will take? Do you think a year from now, a lot of these moves you're talking about as far as the layoffs and reduction in cost of materials and overtime, will a lot of that already be in place?
I think you will see substantial change from a year from now, and I think you'll see savings that are growing over time.
Mr. Chairman, do you have much hope that President Obama will ride to the rescue here with some federal money, stimulus money, and fix this whole thing, or not?
There's a lot of talk in Washington about a new stimulus package. I know the House took some action last night. I hope that a stimulus package comes through. It would be great for New York, and it would really help a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.